I also do some things on the side, and I support PATH wholeheartedly, and am their board chair, as well as I sit on a bunch of different drug courts in the area, both adult and juvenile. And so a lot of this data that we're going to be talking about relates directly to my own work and what I'm seeing in my community. I am a licensed mental health counselor and a licensed clinical addiction counselor. And so hopefully today, no matter what your role is, you've come here to kind of hear a little bit about drugs and alcohol. It is it National Alcohol and Drug Chat Day? So we're going to try to have a chat about that. There was a section that just was a lot to talk about over lunch. And so kind of our strategy for today is I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the landscape of where we're at pre and current COVID as it relates to addiction and some of these drug-related issues. We'll have breakout rooms, I believe around noon is what Donna's shooting for, where you can, grab lunch or have some discussion on this stuff. And if you come back at 12:30, I believe, is when they circle back in, or 12, somewhere close around there. We have an opportunity for discussion and questions, but I'd like to, at that point, give you something free. A free resource. Yes, Jay, I see your eyes go up. Free. A free coping skills resource that Porter Stark utilizes. And I'd like you to give me some feedback on it. It's called My Strength. So you'll want to stick around because that's a tremendous resource for you. So what I'm going to try to do here is share my screen. And we're going to go with this one. How's that? Although, let me pull this down. Sorry for the delay, folks. And we're going to go into slideshow. Okay. Hopefully you see my slides. It looks like you do. Okay, so our talk today really is about the landscape of addiction. And since we're going to be talking about, obviously, drugs and alcohol, we're talking about stuff that is legal and some illicit, illegal materials. And so I want to just give you kind of what's been happening in terms of some of that data. A lot of you are like just boots on the ground in the work, like myself. And we lose track of what's happening on an overall national level with that. I want to be clear that this is not all, I wish I would have done the research and dug all these little bits and tidbits I'm going to be giving you, but really it's adapted from the assistant director, Eleanor McCants of SAMHSA. And so this data is federal data. And so you can trust it and kind of get a picture of what's happening nationally and as well in our community. I'm going to kind of scale this down a little bit for Porter County. So this is kind of a data heavy presentation. So I'm sorry for that. So if you need a break listening to me rattle off, fire a question at me. I'm more kind of a laid back presenter. And so I want to kind of keep this engaging. Here's what I want to kind of overall with this slide point out to you is hopefully you start to, if you're not already what we would consider a preventionist, people that are working the before there's an issue. I'm hoping that some of this information will reaffirm how important prevention is. I'm speaking to you as a clinician, so I've spent a large portion of my career really dealing with people when they already have a problem. And we definitely are making strides in there, but it has felt to me over the years like I'm trying to hold up the old cartoon, somebody trying to plug up a dam and the water's coming through and you're plugging all. That's really what it's felt like to me as a clinician. And so as I have evolved in my work at Porter Stark, I have found and renewed my passion over the last 10 years for prevention, because you all know this. If you get to people before, we're way more effective than the during, and you're going to see some stats on the after. And as you know, the reason you're tuning into this is, this is important, and people are dying. I mean, literally, when people ask me, well, why do you run so hard? Why are you on all these boards? Why are you on these drug courts? Why are you giving up time with your, like for me, it's because people close to me in my family, in my circle, they're dying. And we're not really getting a handle on that. We're making some progress, but prevention to me is really the key. And we really see a lot of that data that shows the benefit of prevention in some of our opioid numbers, which we'll get to today. Not to say that the opioid crisis is over, it's certainly not, but we're starting to see some great data around the benefits of what your work has done. And this presentation really is a call to not forget about kind of our classic, current crises on certain drugs, but to expand our focus today, because we could see that marijuana and methamphetamine and vaping continue to rise, and they're not quite getting the attention for a variety of different reasons, some of them political. They're not quite getting the attention that some of these other substances are. And so it's really kind of a twofold process today. So with that, this is an interesting slide that I like to start with, is to kind of give you an indication of how many people actually are struggling in our nation with, I've broken it out to mental health issues, which is kind of my, where I started this journey, and addiction issues. And when I started my career, everybody liked to keep those separate. I'm only a mental health clinician, or I'm only an addiction. And you know what? It's those of you that I see nodding your head know that times have changed, and those problems are not separate problems. They're intertwined. It just took us a while to understand that. And so what we see here is, as of 2019, now some of you are like, hey, thought you said this was going to be current. Well, I got some current information for you, of course, but those of you that do a lot of work in data, you know that like it's 2019, that's looking pretty good. We're still getting data on coming in. I've got some for you today, but we're still trying to get current data on what's happening with COVID. It takes a while to trickle in and get formulated. But what we see here, I mean, just take a look at some of these. So the big takeaways with mental illness, and again, I'll say these things are interchangeable. I don't know many people that struggle with mental illness that also don't struggle with some type of addiction. And I don't know many people at all that struggle with addiction that don't have some type of mental health issues. 1 in 4 people nationally struggle with some type of mental illness. And depending on if we're talking about illicit or alcohol, look at that, struggles with alcohol use, 3 in 4. But yet, I might step on some toes a little bit today, because I do view alcohol as a drug, and it's a very powerful drug, and it's a drug that is in our culture people look at as appropriate. And I'm not here to tell you people shouldn't drink, but I want you to see that alcohol use in particular is doing some damage still to people, and we've kind of justified it in our culture. But 3 in 4 people struggle with alcohol use. And then as we get into the illicit drugs, you see the numbers there. What I'm trying to do with this slide is give you this middle section here, is that there's people 18 and older with both of these. We're looking at about 9.5 million people. Like, what you are doing is incredibly important. And frankly, all the data suggests, after we're now, I don't knock on wood here, but it feels like we're coming out of our COVID, issues, hopefully. All the numbers suggest that things are getting worse in this area for people. And we can talk about why that is. So let's start with the one that gets a lot of attention. A lot of grant dollars have been pushed this direction, and I'm thankful for that, because a lot of the initiatives I'm working on, both in Porter and Stark, have been funded on a national level. But here's the data I want you to kind of get a hold of. And I'm not saying that opioids are no longer a problem in Indiana. My goodness, they still are nationally. But there are some positive things that are happening around this, including that opioid prescriptions in Indiana have gone down. And that's primarily because of the education and the accountability that different Insight and Inspect has been doing, and doctors being held accountable to watch their prescribing habits. And there have been some pill mills that have been shut down. That has helped us to get a better control on the amount of prescription opioids that there are. And that's a big, you know, if you're not totally familiar with this opioid epidemic, we have heroin, obviously, and then we have stuff that's prescribed, and you're going to see some data on that. Now, you're all aware, because I think some of those of you preventionists have been funded by some of this money, but there's been tremendous funds released from our federal government, state and federal government, to try to get a hold of this issue. And you could see some of the numbers there. We're talking billions of dollars. And a lot of those dollars are directly being attributed to prevention type programs, which is great. And as a result, we are starting to see some of the positive effects from that. Not to say, like, I mean, look at this first one. Opioid misusers numbers have dropped from 11 million in 2017 to 10.3 million in 2018. And we had another shift in 2019, a drop. That's good, it's dropping, but that's still 10 million people that are struggling with that. So I'm in no means saying that, like, hey, we don't have a problem anymore. We clearly do, but I want folks to see that as a result of the money that's coming in and the prevention programs, we're seeing some drops with opioid use, which is very positive. There have been way too many people that have lost their lives to this. The big distinction that we're seeing is kind of a move back and forth between pain reliever misuse and heroin use. And what we're seeing is that a lot of, I believe in a couple slides you're going to see, is that a lot of folks that start with heroin, or that we come into treatment and are like, hey, I'm addicted to heroin, did not start with heroin. Oftentimes these folks have started with real pain, and I believe real pain issues, okay? Yes, there are people that, you know, maybe went to pain medicine too quickly, but I believe there were people that started with pain and went to our medical profession and got help, and it became addicted. And then with different prescribing patterns and habits, we kind of got out of control. With that, though, prescription meds are expensive, and they do provide some challenges to get. And so what we see is a lot of the heroin use today really started in people when they started on some of these prescription meds. And so you can see in these slides here, you can see the data from 2015 to 2018. And although, like, hey, those are still high numbers, we are experiencing some drops there. So that is encouraging. What is not encouraging is that still currently, as of 2019, and, you know, as soon as I can get some 2020 data, I'm sure this will be the case. What is not encouraging is that the majority of people that are getting these prescription drugs are getting it from people they know, their family and their friends, which basically means that we're not doing very well at educating people or motivating people to dispose of these in a proper way. And so your drug take back stuff and all the good things that we're all doing, it's not, I mean, there's some things that are happening, but it's not curtailing the amount of you know, scripts going out the door. What we are seeing drops in is doctors are starting to have to be limited to that, but you're still seeing people getting these from relatives, friends, and just you know, friends and relatives and community, which is a little bit disheartening, because I know that a lot of energy has been spent trying to kind of help people, like, hey, if you're not, first of all, be careful when you are asking for these types of prescriptions. Make sure that you're taking them responsibly, but also, what are you doing with them when you're done? You know, so here's the slide I talked about earlier for this non-medical use of prescription opioids. And what we see is 3 out of 4 people who used heroin in the past year, as of 2018, misused prescription opioids first. And they'll often turn to heroin because it is easier to get and cheaper. Now, there's risks with getting both, but you know, because this is one of the byproducts that we're seeing is with our state, which was a good thing of kind of narrowing down our prescriptions and our medical community, what we've done as a byproduct of that is it's actually pushing people back into heroin. We're not solving the issue. And that issue, you know, of, well, why do people turn to these? Like, we could have an entire seminar based on that. But as I review the research, what I see is that people are more susceptible to these types of drugs, all of which I'm talking about today, when people are isolated and they don't have hope and a purpose. And so a lot of our prevention, you know, it's my idea is education's important, but what are we doing to give people purpose or help them find their purpose or connect them with others? That's the stuff that's been shown, time tested, to decrease some of the things we're talking about today. So 7 out of 10 people who've used heroin in the past year also misuse their prescription opioids. What I want to show by this is just the link in opioid deaths to the reported influx of fentanyl. A lot of the fentanyl, as I understand, is coming from China still, and other places. But when we see increases in the deaths of heroin, we're seeing a corresponding increase in the amounts of fentanyl reports from the DEA. And so you all know that, you know, and have been, you know, I believe educated on, you know, you've got fentanyl, which is, you know, anywhere the research says from 7 to 10 times more powerful than heroin. It's a synthetic. And then you've got carfentanil, which is like, I mean, people are having to, first responders are having to wear special type gloves so that it doesn't get into their pores. That's how bad this stuff is. And so the rate for overdose is much higher. So that was a very brief overview of opiates. And the opioid crisis is still here, but we're seeing some, I think, some positive data on that. Not as quickly as we need it because people are still dying, as I've said, but there's some good things. When are we going to talk about alcohol and the effects that we're seeing nationally on a legalized drug? And so here's some data that I pulled and given you some, just a scan from 2016 to 2019, and in a couple slides I'll show you some 2020. What this slide here suggests to me, and it should suggest to you, is that in terms of alcohol use and people that have used in the past month, those numbers are pretty relatively the same, which means we have not done nearly anything with that that's productive in decreasing that. No decreases. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not sending a message about, you know, drunk driving and the effects of binge drinking, and we're going to see some drops in some numbers around binge drinking for adolescents. But overall, we're not seeing that, you know, adults in particular are making any positive shifts to limit their drinking and their alcohol use. That's telling to me. And that is a lot of it when you talk to people, it's because it's legal. It's legal. And I'm not suggesting we should go back to prohibition, but there is a disconnect for people when we're talking about heroin versus cocaine versus marijuana, which, make no doubt about it, marijuana is going to be that next alcohol, where people kind of justify the use. I mean, all you need to do, those of you that live in Porter County, is, as now we're coming out of COVID and the events start coming back up, is go onto the city pages and start to just keep track of how many events are centered around alcohol. That will show you that our community does not view this issue in the same way that some of our prevention folks view this issue. And I may be a little more conservative than most on this. I'm pretty passionate about, you know, this particular issue. In relation to it being a disorder or being classified as a disorder, in the age group 12 to 17, we have an increase. We have more 12 to 17-year-olds as of 2019 that have had a full-blown diagnosed alcohol use disorder. About 14,000 more. We've seen a dip in alcohol use disorder in 18 to 25, and we've been very consistent with 26 and older. So I guess this is an area to me, I'm curious about, of like, what would it need to look like in our communities to allow people an adult privilege, but also start to communicate with people in a way the damages that this, like any drug, including caffeine. Caffeine is a legal drug but has issues. How do we begin to educate people on this to kind of make a difference as it relates to people getting addicted? Now, little side jaunt here. What do we know about drinking since the pandemic started? Well, I imagine you can guess, right? You can guess, but we do have some initial data. Now, the data is still coming, but just to review, because some of us have had, depending on our state, have had different policies around this. But when COVID came out and it became a crisis, there were 44 states, including DC, that enacted stay-at-home orders. Now, this was, depending on, I'm not getting political here, but depending on your view, there was some medical reasons why people did this. And from a medical standpoint, maybe those were some benefits. Hey, we stopped the spread, we stopped. But psychologically and addiction-wise, trust me, my friends, we will be experiencing the negative effects of all of this for years to come. And I just saw some Mental Health Association data that would suggest that suggested that depression and anxiety were skyrocketing since March. And if you try to get an appointment at Porter Stark, you're going to see that the wait times are just unbelievable right now. And part of that, a large part of that, is due to the influx of people trying to get some help. So we had these stay-at-home orders, and this is when, as you recall, there was closed bars, restricted dining, and to some degrees back and forth, this idea of like, well, we're going to restrict this area but not this open air type of dining. But what you saw was this, and I didn't really pay too much attention to this till it was brought to my attention. Remember when the restaurants were trying to recoup their finances by just adapting their to-go policies? Like, restaurants that had no to-go were now staying alive by basically calling in and getting these orders to your car. Make no doubt about it, there were mixed drinks going as well, and alcohol to go, because that's also a pretty big money. If you're in the restaurant industry, that's a big money maker. So we started to see the effects of the isolation. And this is just some clips from our news articles. How did alcohol sales change in the US? Take a look at what our news reported. E-commerce of alcohol sales tripled in growth during this time. And if we ask why, I mean, just think about how it was for you during this time. It was incredibly stressful. We didn't know, and still don't know, everything that's going on and the effects. People are lonely, they're isolated, they're home with their kids more, which you're going to see some interesting data on that for those of you that are parents that enjoy a nice glass of wine to help you get through e-learning. The bottom line is and still is an incredible stressful piece. And we have seen alcohol sales surge during the pandemic. You kind of already knew that, but now you have the proof. Quarantinis and beer chugs. Is this the pandemic driving us to drink? Happy hour. More people drinking while working from home during COVID. It's much easier to, hey, I'm going to take a break and relax with a midday beer if you're at home and you're not in the office. And so what we really saw is this stress drinking really take off. Now, there has been some research start to come through on some actual numbers. And this RTI, I think I've got it in my notes section. So when I send these to you or send them to Donna to kick out, you'll see the footnotes. But this was an organization that just wanted to look at what the alcohol consumption basically is. They did a web-based survey. They did it in May of last year. So if we're clearly in a different part of the pandemic now, but this was around May, and this is when things were hot, confusing, scary for a lot of people, and things were starting to structure in our state quite, it was tightening. What they did is they surveyed about 1,000 people. The survey was done in February, but the results came, in May, but they surveyed people February, and then again in, I believe, April. And here's how that broke down, men and women, here's your demographics. What did they find? Well, you can assume some of this, but now you have the data. So here's for some of you that are, data nerds like myself, they used regression methods to adjust for the differences in gender, age, race, and they examined alcohol consumption overall in a couple different ways. They looked at it in terms of average drinks per day. They wanted to know, did that increase or decrease with people? They wanted to know the percentage of people exceeding guidelines, drinking guidelines. And they wanted to get an indication on binge drinking this year, this time period, and just see what happened. What we saw in this survey, and I think this connects with what I'm also seeing on a drug court level, is the average drinks per day in February was with the 1,000 people surveyed was about 0.74 drinks per day. By April, it went to 0.94. Now you may be like, oh, what? Look, that's an increase, and it's a substantial increase. And I would imagine if this data continued, you'd see more and more increases with that. So we saw an increase in folks of plus 27%. Those exceeding the drinking guidelines. Now, what are the drinking guidelines? I don't know. I didn't do as much digging into this particular study, but we did see that from February, there was about 29% of those polled exceeded what was appropriate for drinking. Come April, 36%, which is a result of 21%, and is statistically significant. There it is. Binge drinking, what'd we see? Well, similar, an increase. They started in Feb, 22% of those polled said, yeah, I binge drink, and it increased to 27%. Now, as we stratify that out, not to bore you, but what we see is that males increase drinks per day slightly more than women. Slightly more, but we're in the same ballpark. And I think that data would also correlate to other addiction studies, particularly around alcohol consumption in men and women. This is the part I find not hilarious, but eye-opening or reaffirming to me. I'm not a drinker for lots of different reasons, but I've wanted to drink when I was doing e-learning with my 7-year-old and my 11-year-old. Those of you that don't have kids, like, this was a real deal, man. I had to, thank goodness I was able to work from home full time. I had a job that allowed me to do that. And when e-learning was hitting, I was the kid's teacher, and I'm not a teacher. And how am I getting my own work done? And so what you see here is that respondents from February and April, those with kids or no kids had a little bit of an increase. Those with kids during the quarantine, substantial increase from February to April. Like, I say it tongue in cheek, joking, but I'm not. Like, this was a very challenging time for parents to navigate, something as simple as when school went back into session. I felt like my particular school district did a really nice job of managing that the best they could. But when a kid, even now that they're back, when my daughter got sick last week, she started to get a temperature. And the protocol is, hey man, they got a temperature, they stay home, and their brothers and sisters stay home. my kids, and we got to get to the doctor, and we got to do the COVID test. And so my kids are like, Dad, do we have COVID? And I'm like, no, honey, you don't have COVID. You're fine. And even if you did, you're going to be fine. Turns out it was an ear infection. That's all it was, ear infection. But the fear that's around that for people is still very present. And if you're a parent trying to manage that with your kids, it gets a little overwhelming. So a little bit different way to look at it, but nationally, take a look at the parts. These are all increases, by the way. So nationally, everyone increased in drinks per day from February to April. But it looks out west. Out west, they increased a little bit more. I'm curious about that. I know that out west, in particular, California's had a very rough time getting a hold of the COVID pandemic, and so maybe that's part of it. But anyway, you could see that out west in each of these three slides. Here, well, sorry, I guess I jumped over a couple. That's okay. But what you're seeing is out west in all of these, whether it's drinks per day, binge drinking, or above the average, West beats us a little bit. Now we catch up in a couple. So the changes in alcohol consumption for COVID, 5% of respondents increased alcohol consumption for February to April. They drank more often, they drank more days per week, and they consumed more than they drank normally. And this small percentage accounts for over 40% of the increase in alcohol consumption for all respondents. Here is just another way when I'm looking at excessive consumption. I broke it down, kids and no kids. You'll see a very similar dynamic there. And here it is. Here's what it looked like percentage-wise across the United States for people excessively consuming. And here's where our little purple region caught up a little bit. It increased some percentage point, but out west still, people during this time drank more often, and binge drinking was also substantially higher out there, which I find is interesting. So what are the key takeaways from this alcohol piece? Well, alcohol consumption, including excessive consumption, has increased overall and across all several groups, okay, during this time. And we know that this study also showed that the largest increases, were observed in Western US states. This is interesting, is that this study showed that being female, Black, or having children in the household was associated with significant increases on at least one measure. And so this idea of alcohol consumption with our, if we're thinking about, female, minority, children, that's a targeted group that seems to have been impacted a little bit more than everybody else, says this particular study. Lastly, the largest increases in alcohol consumptions were among people who increased their usual quantity consumed and those who were not drinking in excess of recommended guidelines prior to February. So what I'm basically reminding folks here on our drug and alcohol chat day is that we've got to find a way to, especially now with people being more isolated, more stressed, having access to a legal drug, finding out what we want to do about that. Because the short-term impacts are there, including, which I wasn't aware till I dug in the research, the impact of alcohol on the immune system and how it complicates you for COVID-19. There's been some studies on that. Not to say if you drink, you will get COVID-19, but you're more likely, you're more susceptible to it. But we know the long-term uses of this. And this is where how I started the presentation is like, here's data, but what's happening in our field is that mental health, addiction, suicide is up. All of this potential long-term addiction issues that we're going to be working on long after we get to eat at our favorite restaurant again without a mask. So definitely something that as prevention folks we need to take a look at. I paired this I'm sorry, go ahead. Did I hear a question?
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt just a second because there was quite a bit of chat about alcohol.
Oh, okay.
Move on to the conversation around marijuana. And
Yeah.
it may be a great conversation for when we do our breakout rooms to talk about at your tables, but there were a couple conversations about how alcohol is just generally more socially acceptable.
Correct.
Workplaces don't test for it when they're doing their screenings. You know, that's not
Yep.
one of the things they're looking at. So
Yep.
how people, as one of your slides said, you know, people are drinking while they're working at home.
Right.
I would imagine drug testing as a whole
Right.
is down in the
For sure.
in so much remote work. And then Stephanie made the point that so many workplaces, anytime they have activities or functions, alcohol is at the center.
Absolutely.
So, you know, as those of us who are in prevention, how can we, you know, what can we do? What's the next role? And do you have any, I mean, I would assume that many of these people who are just having, as you said, an extra glass of wine to help them deal with their kids and e-learning, how many of them are going to have long-term substance disorder as a result of what has become a habit?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I agree would be an excellent spin-off in the breakout rooms. Everything that it sounds like people are noting, and I pulled up the chat, like I'm with you. Look, I'm not the anti-alcohol guy. I'm not trying to say that, you know, drinking is bad, but we have to take a real serious look at the fact that our culture as a whole minimizes this. And it is the socially acceptable drug. And there are real ramifications for families and people coming out of this stressful time that we need to be prepared for and to start a discussion on. So yeah, that is all great feedback. I think that we're going to see in some of the data that rolls out that we get into 2021 and 2022, you're going to start to see this stuff explode.
But is there any evidence that would say that alcohol is a gateway substance to other drugs?
I really dislike the term gateway drugs because look, as we're moving into marijuana and alcohol, look, they pair. And if you really want to get down to it, cigarettes is in there too. There is a connection, but what I know is a gateway to addiction, let me start there, is I would say trauma. And so trauma and alcoholism work together. Marijuana, opioid, trauma and addiction, that's a gateway. But yeah, I'm not aware of any research I can pull out right now that would give you specifics, but I know that, you know, a lot of folks will start with alcohol and cigarettes before they start this other stuff. Is there a link? I'm not sure. It's definitely what's the scientific term? Correlation and causation. There could be a correlation, but not a causation. So great question. Now I've paired purposely marijuana right after alcohol because if you want to be the life of a party and win friends and influence people, just start talking about alcohol abuse and marijuana from a prevention standpoint. People will move to the other side of the room. But you know, I don't care. I really don't care. I'm looking at facts, and I really dislike the culture we're in right now, where facts are hard to find because everybody's got their facts, and so I'm looking hard at what the data says, and that's what I'm going to cling to. The reason I put this right next to it is like we're headed there, people. We have legislation in we have legislators in Porter County that are pro marijuana, people that I've really worked close with and that I respect on a great many issues. I disagree vehemently with the pro marijuana stance that's happening in our community. And since this isn't just about marijuana, I'm going to kind of slide away there and say, hey, invite me back. I've done some research with an organization that's called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM. Look them up on the internet. Their research is phenomenal about what some of these states that have moved to legalization are experiencing. And all the arguments about, well, tax dollars and all that stuff, they're finding that they're not getting, the only people making money on the marijuana industry are corporate people. And P.S. the tobacco industry, because the tobacco industry is jumping right on board with this legalization movement. And that should tell you everything you need to know about legalization of marijuana. If the tobacco industry thinks it's a great idea and is behind it, get out of the way of it. You know, because they have shown time and time again that they're not really interested in our health. Now, that being said, invite me back another time and we'll talk about that. But what we see here with marijuana is that it's coming. 33 states are allowing medical marijuana use, and 14 states have legalized it for recreational use. And I'm going to try not to get bogged down here, but we're seeing that both of those uses are not highly regulated. That's the problem. They're not regulated in terms of its content, or, you know, who really needs it and who has access to it. It's a hot mess right now. But what we're seeing is huge profits, not from a society tax dollar perspective, but there are people getting rich on it, absolutely. And it's not you and me, and it's not your community. Numerous ways that we're seeing now it being utilized: smoked, eaten, lotions. You can go down to the local, you know, coffee shop, and don't get me started on CBD, but you can get your CBD infused coffee. It's really, it's everywhere, people, and this is not going to bode well for just overall health. What we're seeing is, and you kind of, I've heard many of you talk to me about this, is the increase in THC content over time. It's getting higher and higher, more potent, more toxic. Just from the 90s, when people were getting high off of a 4% blunt with THC, as of 2014, it went to 12%. And in 2019, in general, this is just your general weed that's being sold, they're up to 20% THC content. And currently I'm hearing that our Porter County Sheriff's folks are pulling stuff, marijuana, that has THC levels at a minimum of 50% and almost as high as some 90% THC content. That's not the weed you may have, you know, experimented with when you were a young adolescent. That's some highly potent, toxic stuff that's leading people to not just your normal euphoria and intoxication, but it's firing off some other areas of the brain, including paranoia, psychosis, anxiety, and we're seeing addiction issues increase. I mean, how could they not? When you're getting a more potent product, your likelihood to be addicted to that is going to increase. And so, like, oh, it's natural, oh, it's medical marijuana. Like, I have little runway for that argument when I'm seeing this stuff regularly come into our community. The industry as a whole is also, this is a political issue. The industry as a whole are kind of downplaying some of the risks and adverse outcomes to marijuana. And you see them listed here. These aren't new. There's significant studies that show that these high potent marijuana that's out there can increase your likelihood to experience, I think, one of the most severe mental health issues that I'd never wish this upon anybody: schizophrenia. There's research significantly showing in these states that have legalized it, their increase in schizophrenia has risen and aggressive behaviors has risen. Check out the data in Colorado. You're not seeing it in terms of DUIs yet. You're seeing it in terms of aggressive crimes. And I've got a study on that. If Donna reminds me, I'll send that to you as well. And I'm not saying you're going to get schizophrenia if you use marijuana. I'm saying you increase your likelihood to one of the most severe mental illnesses I can think of, by some data suggests by 50%. I don't want to take that chance. We don't even really understand schizophrenia. All we're really doing with folks is trying to help them live their best life and manage it. And so this is all minimized in this whole marijuana legalization movement. We see that as of 2019, marijuana still is the most used illicit drug that's out there. And there was a huge increase from 2018 to 2019, which means people aren't getting it. You know, we're seeing this legalization make people a little bit more willing to use. Here we see, this is interesting. We see an increase in marijuana use. This is as of 2018. And this is reported use. So it's either documented or self-reported. 12 to 17, we saw an increase in marijuana use. We stayed about the same in our 18 to 25-year-olds. We're not reaching our 18 to 25-year-olds with the downside to using marijuana. And take a look at our 26 and older group. Boy, they're really getting the prevention message, aren't they? They've increased their use in marijuana. And so, like, we've got to figure out what we're going to do to address this continued issue. Here's just another slide specifically for those using marijuana who are 26 and over. It's an increase. It's sad because we do know, again, I'm not calling this a gateway drug, but I don't know many people that started on heroin that just woke up one day and said, I want to try heroin. There were other things that they were introducing into their body. And whether or not we want to say it's a gateway, there is significant data that would suggest how damaging this particular drug is to our bodies, to our brains, to our lungs, okay? And so we see this accumulating adverse effect with people intellectually. Maybe this is why depression and suicide also has increased. I read something that by 2022, depression will be the #1 health problem in America. I said #1 health problem. That'll beat out obesity, that'll beat out cancer, that'll beat out heart disease, that'll beat out lung issues, depression. So like all of this is related together, not to mention those kids that have been exposed to marijuana in the womb and their cognitive effects and issues there. I think we're going to see some motor vehicle accidents increase as well. Although, to be honest, Colorado hasn't seen that. Not quite sure why, if that's a reporting thing or if they're, police officers are figuring out, it's hard to, field sobriety, all that stuff. But we're definitely seeing issues in other ways. Donna, I'm going to pause. Are you okay with questions there?
We are. I will give you, we have about 5, maybe 10 minutes before we want to go to breakout.
Yep. I'm wrapping her up.
Perfect.
You see the data here on vaping. Hopefully, you know how much this is look, technology. Technology is great, but it also feeds into our addiction practices, and the technology of vapes, particularly, here it is. Hey, this is great. Our cigarette use is going down with adolescents. Woohoo! But look what's replaced it, a more, technologically savvy product. And you also know that, although we did get some good legislation, I think, to try to limit the fruit flavored, because by the way, they're not, advertising fruit flavored Juuls for me, a 47-year-old married dude. They're doing that for kids. And so in 2020, I believe, was when the legislation came where, hey, you can only have regular and menthol, but you know what? That's not curbing it much. And what we're finding is that It's not just the nicotine with these vapes that's the problem. You and I know that kids are using cartridges as a connection between e-cigarettes and marijuana, and they're using these cartridges, high potency cartridges, to smoke marijuana in a vape form. And so this new technology also provides many obstacles that we need to adjust for. As I wrap up, I cannot forget and give time to an ever increasing drug we're seeing spike in our regions, which is methamphetamine. This has kind of been an interesting dynamic because meth was big regionally and nationally, and then the opioid crisis, took off, and a lot of numbers and attention went that direction, and meth kind of fell into the background. What we're seeing across the nation, but especially in our state, we're seeing an increase in methamphetamine use. It's cheaper, it's easy to get, less people are starting to realize, wow, if I use too much heroin, I could die. What they're doing is they're using meth. The problem is our meth isn't straight meth. I don't think anybody's meth is straight meth anymore, and you're seeing fentanyl get in there and people dying from that. And so what we're actually seeing is a significant increase in 26-year-old and above adults with meth use. Stimulants. So that's the word I want to throw to you is, yes, we don't want to forget about these others, but we've got to start gearing our prevention and our treatment toward the use of stimulants, because it's a different ball game. It's a different ball game in terms of how to treat it and how to address the drive that connects people to these drugs. And so in these last couple of years, we have seen a drastic increase in meth. And by the way, you're going to get these slides and you'll see that data. This slide simply is, yes. Can
you define stimulants?
Yes, so stimulants would be methamphetamine, any amphetamines like Ritalin. It speeds up brain processing, your heart. It basically gets you up. And if you think about our world, which is like honors overworking and accomplishing goals and crushing it, like no wonder we are starting to have a problem with people trying to get more out of their day, and just run themselves. By the way, caffeine also is a stimulant. Obviously not as powerful as some of those other ones, but, cocaine, those are all stimulants. Those took a back seat to the opioids, and now they're coming back out. What you see in this last slide here before I get to the end is that since 2014, it looks like we're seeing an introduction of fentanyl into our meth, which is bad news for folks who are not trying to OD. What I want to leave you with is, look, all of our work has not been in vain. Prevention has addressed and shown decreases in binge use, alcohol use, some stimulant use, benzos use, tranquilizers, use of pain medicines. Keep going. But as the landscape changes, our approaches need to include some of these different drugs and methods of delivery. So with that, here's the way to get a hold of me. I'm going to be sticking around after your breakouts because I want to talk to you about a free coping skill gift that I would like to give you. So have a good breakout. If you would, talk about, any of this, but particularly your role and how you see your role connecting with getting a better handle on this problem in Northwest Indiana for us. Donna?
Thank you, Todd. I turned off my camera. I had gotten booted out twice. I didn't want to lose it.
Okay.
Sometimes I get better reception without my camera. So
I hear you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, again, thank everyone. Thank you, Todd, for the great information. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a real quick 5-minute break. You guys can grab a drink, grab your lunch if you wanted to eat lunch while you're chatting. And while you're gone, I'm going to divide everybody into breakout rooms. So when you see on your screen, you'll be asked to join a breakout room. We've had some great conversation that has brought a lot of questions to the table. I would love for you guys just to introduce yourselves, pay attention to what table you are going to, assign or volunteer to be your spokesperson for your table. When we come back, we're going to do a real quick report out, what you talked about, any questions you have. Todd will be here to answer questions and again, share a free resource for us as we close this thing out. So 5-minute break. We'll have about 20 to 25 minutes in your breakout sessions, and then we'll come back to hear about Todd's resource, answer your questions, and get on with our day. So thanks again. Enjoy your break, and I'm going to start assigning breakout rooms. Hopefully you had some great conversations. Before we get started, you'll see I'm sharing my screen. I will give it back to Todd here in just a second, but I wanted to remind everybody that we do these lunch table webinars free every month, the fourth Wednesday of the month. Our April speaker is April 28th. Lisa Raftery will be our speaker. She is a native of Northwest Indiana, currently living with her family in Omaha, Nebraska. She is an author, a blogger, a teacher, a personal friend of mine, and amazing. So I encourage you, if you work with teens, she's going to be talking about how to talk with teens in a way that they will actually hear what you're saying. Registration is already open. You can find it on our website, positiveteenhealth.org. Just go to events and you will easily find the registration on that page. So I am going to stop sharing and turn the conversation back over to Todd for Q&A and table feedback. And Lewis has graciously offered for his table and his group to go first. Lewis, what group were you part of so that I know what tables are done?
I think it might have said one when I went in, but
number one.
It was one. Okay. So
Whatever. Yeah. Okay, table number one, go for it.
All right. So we just kind of talked a little bit about, how and what we do and what we feel like we can do to contribute to helping, in the areas that Todd talked about. How can we contribute to helping that? And so we kind of talked a little bit about just like how Love Notes, how in our program, Sandra. All right. And so we talked a little bit about just, in our program with Love Notes, we deal a lot with the relationships and mainly like with the romantic type of relationships. But as we pointed out, and Lisa, I'm not sure if she's still on, but she mentioned how when you're dealing with substance abuse and things like that, those are actually relationships too, that people, build. And so it was like an aha moment, because sometimes you don't associate that as a relationship. When you say relationships, you're thinking about, romantic or friends or whatever, but that's a relationship that forms. And so that was an aha moment for us. But then, we kind of went on to talk about just how in Love Notes, we believe that we affect a lot of the areas that Todd talked about in our teens, because there's a couple things that we do in our program. We're not only building their will and awareness to be able to have resistance and say no, or to have the will to get out of a wrong relationship. We're building those tools in them that they can take those tools, and also it'll go across lines to where they can also say no in another area when you're dealing with substance abuse, because they have that self-will built up inside of them. And as well as we have a section on there where we're talking about vision and building vision. So now if they have that vision built inside of them for their futures, it not only with a relationship, but also other types of temptative type of things. I'm not sure if that's a word, temptative, but temptations type of things, they can revert back to their vision that they have for their future, and notice that as being something that is harmful and impeding what they really want.
For sure.
So
For
yeah,
sure.
that's kind of
Good
yeah.
work. Yeah. Good work.
That's up. That's really great. How about table number 2? Let's see, who is at table number 2? I took a picture this time. I'm prepared.
It was Jasmine, myself, and Jenny.
Right. Anne, Jasmine, Jay, Jenny, and Sabrina.
And Sabrina.
Sabrina. We didn't come up with a spokesperson, but I'll let the ladies go first. I was the only male in there, so I'll let the ladies go first.
Let's go, Jay. I'm joking.
But we did talk about like positive coping skills and how that would be great to emphasize. And Jasmine said it would be good, you know, maybe even at the beginning, like as an icebreaker, because they don't take very long to do something, you know, whether it be like I don't know, wouldn't really say an example, but, you know, a way to kind of be in the moment, or mindfulness. That's the one I'm thinking of, you know, exercise or something like that. So that's something we talked about.
Nice.
Anybody else from table 2?
We also kind of talked a little bit about the fact that sometimes when people are in the midst of drugs and alcohol or whatever that they're facing, that they don't really realize the consequences. And when they are in that consequence stages of that, it's kind of too late sometimes. And I kind of shared a personal example of that, where my sister died from drugs last July. So we're actually getting ready to come up on a year of that. So this is a very, very near and dear and a fresh conversation really to our family. And, you know, my sister was one that was actively working. It seemed like she was fine. Everything was going well. And then my 12-year-old nephew finds his mom dead in the bathroom. You know, so it's one of those things, I think sometimes when our judgments are clouded and we are in that severe consequence stage, sometimes we don't realize how far we've gone. So really just talking about this positive coping skills, not just for the individual who's in that addiction, but also for those that are still, you know, trying to help those individuals. So it's a full circle of just trying to provide that for everyone. And really, we talked about the product of environments and how everything is just becoming socially acceptable. And, you know, again, not really understanding or really setting healthy boundaries when it comes to what's socially acceptable and what's not. So again, that kind of goes back to that conversation about we see the fun in the drinking, we see the fun and all that kind of stuff, but where's the consequence fall into that? So the recovery portion of that and all that. So that was kind of some of the things that we talked about. But also, Todd, what you said about the depression was really, I don't think it was a surprise, but it was a surprise. I think we also said that. Thank you all for your comments. Appreciate that. You know, when you said that depression is going to be kind of surpassing everything, it was kind of like, it was a surprise when we heard it, but it wasn't a surprise because everybody's non-exempt to depression. Everybody is experiencing depression on some type of level. So that was just kind of really a pretty cool thing that we talked about because of that. So
nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
All right, table number 3, that was Sharbria, Jeremiah, Nicole, and Stephanie.
Yeah, so, you know, we, again, kind of very similar to some of the other groups. First of all, we were talking about the mindfulness of everything, you know, of just being aware of what's going on, because just like you said, Jason, like it wasn't shocking to hear the correlation between mental health and addiction. Wasn't super shocking to hear some of the numbers, but like what really upset me was when you brought up the whole thing about 12 to 17 year olds and the rate of alcoholism and an alcoholic disorder, I believe is what you said.
Right.
And that one kind of stuck out to me. again, you know, it wasn't necessarily shocking. It was saddening
Yeah.
to me. And because, you know, I have, not necessarily on my side, but on my wife's side of the family, there's just a lot of issues regarding addiction and things like that, that they have encountered and, you know, struggled with over the years. They actually just lost someone just recently as well, that we just, you know, did a funeral for about 6 months ago. And it's just sad to see and to hear all the things that are going on out there. And just the fact that when it comes to mental health and addiction and having the mindfulness of that, you know, especially in everything that we do in all of our jobs, you know, we all teach different programs and do things in different ways and relate to people in different ways. But, you know, one of the things that made me think of this is just, it made me feel like, you know, maybe we can incorporate some sort of piece about mental health and how it's connected to a lot of stuff that we're talking about. Because I think that would be beneficial even to us as an organization. It definitely will grab the attention of a lot more people. So we were just really talking about what it is that we do, just having a little bit more mindfulness about what we're doing. And while we weren't super shocked at some of this information, it just made us all the more wanting to be more mindful and passing on that mindfulness to other people. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for that feedback. That's good. Mission accomplished then. Yep.
Okay, one more table. Brenda, Crystal, Kathy, Man, and Sandy.
So I'm the spokesperson. Surprise, surprise, I talk a lot. And I guess it shows. So they decided I should be the spokesperson. We had great conversation though, where we heard from our team, and the interaction and what they brought to it, I really appreciate. So thank you, team number 4, table 4. Woo-hoo. We should have made a dance or something to TikTok for it.
Maybe next time. Maybe next time.
Okay, so we start off, and actually I'm going to start with our last statement that came from Man. We were talking about the information that you shared with us, Todd, and how, you know, it's eye-opening and it makes you pause and think. And he said, you know, the number one indicator really when we look at teens and if they're going to follow the wrong path, really look at their friends. Who are they hanging out with? Because friendships are so influential, and that we do have some control over as parents. So I think getting that message out to parents as well and students, you know, choose your friends carefully because they're a reflection of yourself. So we started with that. We also talked about, wow, one of those moments where your jaw just kind of drops when you think about the trauma that triggers all of this. How many youth experience trauma at a young age? And some of that trauma has been recent because of COVID. Those that are home teaching, they feel the stress of having to teach their siblings and keep their own schoolwork going. Some of them had to get part-time jobs to help support their family when there was job loss. And they've also lost that connectivity with each other.
Right.
And we discuss the ACEs, how they start at such a young age, and there's hidden abuses due to COVID because their safety net of school has disappeared. And that's where it was their safe place, where they had those adults that knew and checked on them daily to see if they looked okay. If we suddenly turn off cameras and we can't see them and feel those emotions, there's no one watching anymore. So, you know, that was the first part of our conversation. And then we talked about what can we do about that?
Right.
You know, what is our role in it? So the second part, we really talked a long time about things that could be done to help. And Brenda works in LaPorte County and in that area, and she works with schools with volunteer advocates. They had kids who couldn't participate during COVID because connectivity, and that's scary. Those rural connectivity problems, they're an issue, but there's a solution that Brenda shared a really important resource with us that I want to share with you. The FCC now offers $50 towards free internet for eligible households, and eligible households are those students who are on free and reduced lunch. That's a lot of kids. So we need to get that message out so that they can improve their connectivity. A lot of them don't realize they can get that. They can also get $100 towards a laptop or tablet to help them be more connected. And anybody who is, Brenda, what was the other eligibility piece that they could get it if they received a Pell Grant? Oops, you're muted.
You're muted, Brenda.
Sorry about that. I was going to the FCC so I could paste the link.
Oh,
But
okay.
Thank
Pell
you.
Grant recipients, so kids in college, Pell Grant recipients.
Well, that's pretty neat to think that, you know, they're providing that resource. So thank you, Brenda, for sharing that. If you could put it in the chat, did you get it there?
I'm getting it.
Okay. But that pretty much summed up, you know, we talked about our role as adults and how we
Very
need to
good.
connect to kids. So that's
Very
table
good.
4.
Sounds like some excellent discussion for sure.
Yes.
Just across the groups. I appreciate you pressing into this because really it is about, you know, how we're going to continue to make a difference and affect change for people, people that are struggling. Donna, is it okay if I transition us into the last bit of business, the free resource?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm looking at our time. I got 10 minutes. And so what I'm going to try to do is share my screen once again, share screen, and we'll come over here and you should see this. Oh, thank you for keeping that out of my way. Okay. And now I'm going to share, let's see here. Let's hang on for a second. I'll rewind this here. Share computer.
Help you through
There we
it.
go. Okay.
It's a resource
One more
offered by
time.
your provider or sponsor.
Take a look at this short video. This is about a program that I'm going to be offering to you in just a minute. Check it out.
We all struggle from time to time. My Strength is here to help you through it. It's a resource offered by your provider or sponsor at no cost, available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whether it's depression, anxiety, stress, chronic pain, problems with sleep or substance use, or you just want to keep your emotional health strong, My Strength has a range of tools and resources that are customized just for you. Find inspiration, mood tracking, and hundreds of videos and activities that will empower you to feel better and stay better. Sign up today.
All right. Let me get out. Oh, one more time. Let me get out of this share. Okay. I think I stopped the share. Very good. So this is something I'm very proud of that Porter Stark is allowing me to do, and that I have kind of a voice with this particular software. Everything we talked about today is connected to this My Strength piece for you. Basically, this really since Affordable Care came into the picture, which was a great resource to get help into people's hands. Community mental health centers have struggled to keep up, to hire enough people, to handle the need coming in, to adjust flow of services. And so it's been a hard several year process. And to Porter Stark, I think is great, but we have some weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses is getting people in quickly and out quickly. And so we've been on the hunt for we've been doing this now for about 4 years, but we were on the hunt prior to that for a couple of years we've got to find a way to integrate technology a little bit more into what we're doing. We know, we can't do like therapy in a box. We can't like give people, that piece, although, telemedicine's taken off and we're actively involved in that. But we wanted to try to get resources into people's hands while they waited to get with their therapist, because sometimes that could be a while. And so we came across this program, My Strength, and we started offering this to our clients free of cost. And basically think of this as kind of like a health club for your mind. It's an app that goes across phone, whatever type phone you have. And if you have the best kind of phone, you have an iPhone. No? Okay. If not, don't worry, Android users, you can use this as well. What we did is started providing this to our clients and said, look, you know, this isn't going to be therapy, but it's going to provide you some coping skills and some things that, you know, can tide you over. And so this what basically is an evidence-based program to help people cope. And so prior to COVID, we were using this with our clients, and our clients really were appreciative of it. We felt like they were communicating that it carried them over to the therapist much easier and much more seamlessly. And we started tracking it, and it got people out of treatment quicker because clinicians that were using this with their clients in session and giving assignments, there's activities, all of these are current videos, they're short and sweet, that you can, on any number of issues, physical, emotional, or from a mental health perspective. You know, if you want to lose weight, MyStrength's got an app for that. If you want to have better sleep, they've got a module for that. If you want to work on depression, module. If you want to work on parenting, module. If you want to work on anything under the sun, this program has a robust videos and activities to help you do it. And so what is really cool about this isn't just that, but it has this tracking capability that once you personalize it for you, and once you put in your goals, it will start to track how you're doing with those goals. So for instance, I run hot on the depression and anxiety scales, okay, in general. I have struggled with that probably since graduate school for me. And I have found through using this app that February in particular, I just get a little more crankier. I'm a little more depressed. I'm a little more anxious. This app noticed that because I was scoring on my goals. And what it does is when I am dipping, it pushes out more anxiety, more depression, evidence-based techniques. It gives me inspiration. You know, I'm a big quote guy. There's ways to trigger into their quotes. I'll show you some of this in a minute. But I found it helpful. And so we gave it to our clients, and overwhelmingly it was like, hey, thanks for doing this. We think it's helpful. Use it. So then we started giving it to our staff. You know, would you believe that in our field, people that are in the addiction and the mental health field, we really don't do well taking care of ourselves. And so as a part of our wellness, we're like, staff, we're not going to charge you for it. Use it. And because it is, you know, privacy and protected, HR doesn't get this information. It's secure. It's evidence-based using CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Our staff really reported like, hey, this is helping me kind of keep my edge, keep my own coping and mood levels up. So we had good success with that. And so then, we started implementing this and giving this to our community members for free. So when I go out and I do a presentation that I think it fits with, I throw it in there. And this has been our largest pool of people that are using it because it's opened up a dialogue. We've talked about how, you know, depression is so common, anxiety is so common. I used to do presentations, in everything from schools to businesses. And I'd ask people when I'd talk about these issues, how many people have personally had issues with depression or anxiety or know a family member that has? And I don't ask that question anymore. Not because they don't answer. What I was seeing was that everybody raises their hand. If you are on this call and you're like, you know what, I've never struggled with addiction or depression or anxiety, and I don't have anybody in my family that does, you are blessed and you are in the minority. Because the majority of us deal with this, not just in our lives or not just in our professional lives, but personal. So this has opened up a tremendous conversation to kind of decrease stigma. You know, it's so common, but yet people don't talk about it. You know, having these conversations like, hey, everybody gets depressed a little bit in different degrees. That's a relatively new topic of conversation to have with people where they'll openly embrace that. So we push this into the community. I've been really pushing this harder since COVID hit because of everything we talked about. And I'm offering it to you for free as well for two reasons. One, for you, I use it personally. I've been using it for the last 3 years, and I find it very helpful. But I also respect your opinions, and I'm curious, new eyes getting on it. Like, do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's, still relevant? How are I get on the phone with these guys once a month where they are adapting their program based on feedback I give them. And if you kind of look at my screen a little bit, all right, I stopped sharing it. Hang on. I'm watching my time, Donna, no worries. If you look at our screen, these are some of the activities, just a couple that MyStrength hits. Depression, anxiety, reducing stress, mindfulness, and meditation. There's a huge database to teach people how to be more mindful and meditate. Some people call that prayer. Other people call it, meditation. There's a whole outstanding resource to boost your coping ability or coping skill with that. Improving your sleep. How many of you have problems sleeping? I guarantee that MyStrength has activities that will help you increase your total sleep time. Pregnancy, early parenting, balancing emotions. Here's our trauma. Managing chronic pain. Dealing with pain without opioids. Got activities and training on that. Opioid recovery. Nicotine. We didn't even talk about nicotine today, but there it is. And those are just a couple. And so what this I want to allow you to do is to be able to try this on your own. There's no cost. Porter Stark isn't going to be sending you a bill in 8 months or whatever. How long are we doing this? As long as we do MyStrength. We've been doing it now for about 4 years. It's not going anywhere as far as I'm concerned. And so I want to give it to you to use, and I also want to give it to you for feedback. So how do you do it? Well, easiest way is on your phone. You go to your app store. If you're lucky enough to have one of those beautiful iPhones, you go to the app store. If you're not, you go to Google Play and you can search MyStrength. One word, MyStrength. And you'll see the app, you download it. It will then ask you for personal information. At that point, what it's doing is it's trying to tailor this information specifically for you. I'm a 47-year-old, married, slightly overweight, Caucasian dude with kids. That's not you, okay? So you want information, and some of you are like, thank goodness I'm not like Todd. That's good. Gear it toward yourself, okay? And then when it asks you for a payer code, most important information coming up right here. That's how we could charge for it if we wanted to. We're not. And the payer code that gets it to you for free is BALANCE, like you're on a balance beam, BALANCE, balance. You put that in there and it's for free as long as you want to. Now, if you're like, I don't want it on my phone, I like to use my laptop. Well, you will go to www.mystrength.com and you'll do everything that I just said to you. Now, the notes for today are coming out to you, as well as a short little instruction sheet of how to access this MyStrength if everything I just said to you kind of went over your head. No worries, I'll have it written down for you in hard copy. Can you give it to people? Sure. It's evidence-based for other adults, not for teens. Doesn't mean it's going to hurt teens. It just doesn't mean there's no evidence to support it works. So with that, it has been a joy to be with you today. Hopefully, it didn't feel like you were standing in front of a fire hydrant getting blasted. People have told me at different times that's what it sounds like when I speak. It's because I have a lot of passion and I want to get you as much information as possible. So with that, thank you for allowing me to spend the afternoon with you.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks so much for having joined us today and for all the great information. We always appreciate what you bring. Again, let me remind you that the registration is already open for next month. The date is April 28th, and we'll be talking about how to talk to teens in a way that they'll actually hear what we're saying. We hope to see you again, and we will get an email out to you with the presentation, the link to the recording, the survey, a few extra pieces that Todd mentioned he was going to provide for us. And I will include the information on MyStrength as well. And you should receive that within about 24 hours. We just have to do some editing on the recording. Thanks so much again for joining us today. I see some people are already showing they've got their, I did it. I've been using My Strength for a little while myself, and they send me emails once a week with quotes and encouragement, and I'm really enjoying it. So I encourage you, as Todd did, to give it a try. So if there's nothing else, I thank you all again for joining us today. Wish you a great end of your week, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye, everybody.